Hey guys, welcome to episode 66 of The Green Life. Today we carry on the conversation around plant-powered protein. Last week we had Brenda Davis here with her son Cory Davis, and we talked all about the environment and sustainability. So today we're going to continue the conversation but move it towards nutrition. So today I have Brenda again, of course, on the show with her colleague Vesanto Melina, who's been working with Brenda for over 30 years and who has co-authored many books with her. And I just find it such a beautiful relationship that really manifests in wonderful work to help others understand nutrition, health, and really thrive on a plant-based diet. Now, before we get a little bit deeper into the episode, a big shout out to Nama Wealth, the J2 juicer. If you guys are on the market for a new juicer, you can use my code in the show notes for 10% off. Also, if you are willing to travel to Europe and come to Portugal, our retreat center is open this summer. Ecodharma Village is open to welcome you to experience our beautiful setup, and we would love to see you here. So if you go into the show notes, you can find out about it too, and hopefully we'll see you here. Okay, back to the show. So Vesanto and Brenda are amazing spokespeople for plant-based nutrition. They are both registered dietitians, and Vesanto also received the Riley Jeffs Memorial Award in 2016, which is the highest recognition that the Board of Certified Dietitians of Canada can bestow on a member. So this is quite a legacy. And of course, I've spoken about Brenda before, many achievements. She's the godmother of plant-based nutrition, and they both have a wonderful way of sharing information, researching, and writing books that are so educational and should be on everybody's shelves, especially if you're interested in learning more about the nutritional side of things, but also educating others when questioned if you are on the lifestyle already. Okay, without further ado, let's dive into this wonderful episode. Welcome, Brenda and Vesanto. Hello, Vesanto and Brenda. How are you today? Such an honor to have you here on the show.
I'm really well. We're busy doing interviews for our new book, Plant Powered Protein, and it's really fun because it's reaching so many people. It's ranking very high on Amazon, and people are really interested in it. And we had such fun. I think you had Cory Davis speaking on your podcast recently, and that's added a neat feature. So Brenda and I have written together for 30 years, and it's just been such a pleasure to do these things.
Yeah, and I feel the same. I'm very privileged, and I'm so happy to be back with you again, and hope that we can provide some new and exciting information for the listeners. And thanks to everyone who's listening. So very nice to have so many people.
Brilliant. I people don't know, like the nice things that happen before the episode starts recording is that you can have nice chats and really connect to the speakers. And we did that. And is what I find really nice is that we, there is this part of, we have a life and we have things that happen and we're busy. And then all that we learn in our life, all that we experience, then we can create something with it. And like you guys obviously experienced becoming vegan, experienced eating in a certain way, experienced the feeling of looking after, ushering and being ushers of nature and animals, and then everything became these products, beautiful books that you have and the education that you create. So I've obviously read pretty much all your books that you wrote together. I have them all here, and I love that I can really rely on these resources if I have any questions, because they are timeless, and also because you guys are always working, you're always updating what's going on. But obviously, today we're going to talk about the newest book, which is Plant Powered Protein. And although I'm really happy you wrote the book because that question is still there, I would have just hoped that after all this time, people just stopped asking where we get protein. I mean, we clearly are not having any protein deficient vegans around. So why is that question so strongly asked still?
Yeah, our publisher wanted us to write it. And we said, Bob, nobody needs that book. Vegans get plenty of protein. And he said, well, that's what they always ask. When he's at conferences and at his book booth and everything, that's what they ask. So we did this. And starting rather reluctantly, but it turned out to be really, really interesting to do. It was fascinating to do. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and just to add a little bit to that, Chantal, I think, in our culture, we have this mindset that only animal products provide real protein. Yeah. And it really stemmed back from an era when malnutrition, insufficient calories, insufficient protein were huge public concerns, and they were kind of our number one nutrition concerns. And so the government put in place a number of things to try to rectify that. And they began, and of course, animal products are concentrated protein sources, concentrated calorie sources. And so, they ended up putting a bit of a halo around these products in that regard. And that stuck. People, have been raised to believe that these are our main or only protein sources. And so some education in terms of the public is still required to overcome those myths, if you will.
Yeah, and you mentioned it last week very beautifully as well. Like the history has defined how we look at certain things, and in a way, it's simplified things by putting things in three categories. We have carbs and proteins and fats, but then it also complicated things, because now people just look at certain things as a macronutrient and not actually as an array of things. Because the beautiful thing about plant-based is that you get protein, yes, but then you get also the fiber. So you get the carbs, you get the some limited amount of fats which are not saturated. Like you get so many other nutrients that are so key to our well-being. Instead, we always look at animals. I mean, flesh is really limited to protein and some, of course, micronutrients, but protein and fat. And so, but we have just oversimplified everything. So I think people are confused. And because they're confused, you can decide who goes for this one. But can we just explain what proteins are, and also breaking down, well, obviously, the fact that they're amino acids and what amino acids do in our body?
Okay, I'll start with this one. Well, one of the things that, since I'm someone who's done research for a long time, and I remember the era when we used to do rat studies, including rat studies to figure out how much protein there was in something. And rats love cheese, and they grow well on meat, and they grow fur. The studies that were done, they double their weight in 4 weeks. And people do not want to double their weight in 4 weeks. And they do not grow fur all over their body. Their requirements are actually quite different. So we were kind of put on a wrong track by that. And yet many countries are still using the evidence that came from rat studies to determine the quality of protein. It's really interesting. Yeah, still. And it's tricky to figure out how much protein we need. Protein is these long strings of amino acids. And we also had the idea that these are in animal products, but not in plant foods. And actually, all the amino acids originate from the plant foods. So we can get them from animal products, but we can also get every single one of them from plant foods when we have a kind of mixed diet, and it doesn't have to be carefully combined. So protein is all these amino acids, and they're all required for building, but we don't need to eat animal products to get them. We definitely don't need to.
Yeah, and just to add a little bit to that, there are 20 amino acids, different types that are used to make proteins in the human body. 9 of those are considered essential, and they're just essential because we can't make them. And to Vesanto's point, animals like cows can't make them either. They're made by plants. So it makes no sense to think we can't get them from plants. It's where they come from. So we either can get them directly from plants or indirectly from animals that ate the plants, or from animals that ate other animals that ate plants. But it's plants that actually, manufacture those essential amino acids. So of course we can get them from plants.
Brilliant. And actually you touched onto something. People have this idea that if we don't have all the essential amino acids in a meal, that we're going to be deficient. But clearly, from what you said, if we get them from the flesh of another animals, who got them from the plants, there is an accumulation into our body, right? Into the flesh, the stays in the muscles. So that means that we also store enough of these essential amino acids in our body. We're not becoming deficient just by missing a meal where you maybe don't have one of them. So can we just maybe get a bit nerdy about the science of amino acids and how it works? So if somebody, because I think a lot of people really visualize, I have to eat the whole protein to have protein, right? So how do actually amino acids work in the body? If we can explain a little bit of that, a little bit of science.
Okay, well, we do pool the amino acids. In the 70s, we thought for a while, based on a book, Diet for a Small Planet, we thought that you had to combine beans and grains. And that was the only way to get all of the amino acids. And after 10 years, Frances Moore Lappé said, oops, that wasn't really true. Like, we don't have to carefully combine beans and grains. But we were thinking that way for a little while. And some people still have that idea. It turns out that the amino acids are in all sorts of different foods. The beans and grains, certainly, but also in the vegetables, in the nuts and seeds. And so if you get a mix of all the different foods, you get a beautiful blend. But you can eat some things at breakfast, some at lunch, some at supper, and your body pools the amino acids. In our website, plantpoweredprotein.com, there's a dash between plant and powered. We do have a food guide there, and people can see the kind of balance for the day. But you don't have to be too rigid about this, because our body really does gather them. And every single plant food has every one of the essential amino acids.
That's interesting.
Yeah, every food. The only food that lacks an amino acid is actually an animal product, a gelatin.
Oh, that's interesting too.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Actually, since we're talking about what the plants having all the amino acids, a lot of people argue that fruit doesn't. Does fruit also have amino acids then?
It does have a little bit, but it's the one that's kind of short. So when we've seen nutrition studies where people were short of protein, they were actually some of the raw vegan studies that were done decades ago when people just were eating fruit. That's not a wise idea. It's good to add some of the other food groups. You can be 75% kind of, high raw fruit. But just going on fruit, you can be a little bit low. So people would feel wonderful for about 3 or 4 months because of all these excellent nutrients and phytochemicals that are in fruit. And then after a while, they'd kind of be running a bit low on protein and iron and so on.
Okay. Yeah, and just to add to that, add one thing to that, every single fruit contains every single essential amino acid. They contain them all. It's just fruits are so low in protein that the total amount you get could be insufficient. So they do, to the question, do they have the essential amino acids? Yeah, they have all of them. It's just the quantities are so low that if all you ate was fruit, it would be tough to meet your total protein requirements.
Yeah, I mean, there are some influencers right now that are promoting being fruitarians, and I think Vesanto, as you said, like, you can feel really good for a while. Because at the moment, I really do feel like having mostly fruit. I don't know why. I have moments.
Yeah,
it's summer.
But I see, obviously people that speak about how we can live just on fruit. And I don't know if it's because obviously they are having a very large amount of calories. So they probably, I wonder if then they can meet that enough protein, because they are seriously having, like, we're talking 4,000, 5,000 calories on fruit. So I wonder if obviously there is a relationship between how many calories you have and the protein you can get.
Well, I've analyzed one raw food person's diet, Doug Graham's,
Yeah.
To see how the protein level matched up. And for example, on this day, he had 16 bananas for lunch. But this is somebody that runs a lot, gets a lot of exercise. So the total calories were about 3,500. And then the protein just barely met the official recommended intake, which I admit does have a bit of a safety margin. So you don't necessarily need quite that much, but it was interesting that, so for this very high activity level, as you say, and when the calories overall are high enough, you can meet your protein recommended intake. But it isn't the ideal. So I know some of the raw food leaders have gone, like Sherry Soria, for example, have gone, yeah, it's okay to eat some cooked food too, that you could have some beans or baked yams, this kind of thing, to add to the whole mix.
I see. Okay, so you mentioned something that segues perfectly in the next stage, and maybe we can divide this between you two. You said obviously we have the benchmark of how much protein we need, and it wasn't like the best way to see how much we need, because obviously we're different from rats, but if I'm sure that we all need different amounts of protein depending on our activity level, our age. So if we can, and I know you have this in the book, obviously, so why don't we talk about the needs for protein at different stages of life so that we can understand, how much a child would need, and in pregnancy, a teenager, an athlete, and then obviously the aging population. So you can choose which age groups you want to focus on. We can divide it.
Sure. Do you want to start? Maybe I'll start with pregnancy and lactation.
Perfect.
So during any sort of critical stages of rapid growth and development, protein needs increase, and that's not surprising because protein is a structural material for building cells, and so during pregnancy and lactation, the increase is really close to 50% above non-pregnant recommendations. And so the RDA during, and this is of course the North American RDA, but for pregnant and lactating women, for non-pregnant and lactating, it's 0.8 grams per kilogram body weight. For pregnant, it's 1.1, and for lactating, it's 1.3. And so that really amounts to about 25-30 grams of additional protein per day, or for most women, about 70 to 80 grams. And so for those eating very high fiber plant-based diets that don't get a lot of, lower fiber foods like tofu and soy milk and peanut butter and veggie meats and those kinds of things, some experts would suggest adding, 10%, because the protein in whole high fiber plant foods is slightly less digestible. And so that would mean that 1.2 grams per kilogram body weight during pregnancy and 1.4 during lactation. And so from a practical perspective, what this really means is that people who are pregnant or lactating just need to be a little more conscious about selecting protein-rich foods at each of their meals and at snacks. So they might use soy milk instead of almond milk, for example, or add some hemp seeds to the breakfast bowl, or put tofu or beans and pumpkin seeds on their salads, and just make sure that there's a decent source of protein. Even snacks, they might have hummus or, peanut butter with their veggies, just adding it throughout the day so they can hit their target.
Yeah, very, very well said. I mean, I think people really forget how much we require to create life. It's really, really important.
Exactly. And I can go on and talk a little bit about infants and toddlers, and then let Vesanto take it from there.
Yeah.
So, infants and toddlers also, of course, are growing. But they, the interesting thing is they're little tiny bodies. And so if you look at the RDA for infants, it's, 1.52 during early infancy, 1.2 during the second half of the first year of life. And then for 1 to 3 year olds, you're looking at about 0.95 1.05 grams per kilogram body weight. And then it goes down to about 0.95 for children from 4 to about 13 years of age. And then it drops again during the adolescent years to about 0.85. But if you look at the biggest study we have that has examined the intakes of children eating different dietary patterns, and that's VECI, which is a study out of Germany. They looked at 430 1 to 3-year-old toddlers, and they averaged, the average protein intakes were 2.7 grams per kilogram for omnivores, 2.3 for lacto-vegetarians, and 2.4 for vegans. And so that you remember 1.05 is the RDA, so they were all well above, double the RDA. And that's because these little tiny bodies, they don't weigh a lot. So their protein requirement is probably 13, 14, 15 grams a day. And some experts suggest it be a little bit higher for whole food plant-based children, maybe 30% higher, so as high as maybe 17 grams a day. But almost all toddlers are getting closer to 30, 35 grams a day. So it's just not a huge thing for, to be honest, for children to get enough. Now, the children that I worry about a little bit are children that are eating a lot of highly processed foods. So they're getting a lot of calories from sugar and oil, and they're eating a lot of just refined foods, and they're not eating a lot of legumes. Children often have an affinity to really starchy foods, and so they'll eat the rice or the potatoes or the pasta, but not necessarily wanting the beans. And so that's the challenge for parents, is to make sure that they are using the higher protein milks, for example, like soy or pea milk, and that they are somehow getting those legumes in, whether it's, adding them to, red lentils to a spaghetti sauce, or in the form of hummus, or, one of the things my daughter always did was provide beans as a snack. And so it would just be, black beans or kidney beans or chickpeas. And the kids love to snack on those beans. And in fact, if I would ask the kids what would you like for lunch, and give them options, they would almost always choose beans as one of the things that was in the mix. So if you start early and provide those legumes, they get used to the taste and texture, and they, grow in a preference for eating those foods. So I think that's really important. And the other food that kids tend to love is tofu. And I remember I used to do a kind of a tofu with nutritional yeast, and my kids used to call it Kentucky Fried Tofu, just because I used seasonings that had a little bit of that flavor. And so it's not that hard to get those foods into kids, but we do need to be somewhat conscious. Generally, children get more than enough protein. So yeah, so I'll let Vesanto take it from there.
And actually, before we move to another stage of life with Vesanto, I do have a question about pregnancy again, and then
for sure,
infancy, because again, a lot of on the online space is is flourishing right now with a lot of influencers I mentioned, and as I mentioned, fruitarians. There are also a lot of pregnancies that are being shared as being fruitarian pregnancies, and then in childhood, the children are mostly fruit-based, and so they have some nuts and some seeds. Now, from what you said about children easily reaching 15 grams of protein, I wonder if they eat enough calories from the fruit and the nuts and the seeds, they might get enough protein. I don't know, but it's still a limited amount of food that they have, because they don't have access to a lot of the foods. Obviously, they don't eat grains. They don't really eat grains. They don't eat tofu. They don't eat beans and pulses. And likewise, the mothers who have done pregnancies just on a fruitarian diet, what do you see this as? Well, first of all, do you think it's possible? Because a lot of them are doing it, so they must be doing something right. Is it possible? And if it's possible, what do people need to look at? And also, if it's not advisable, why?
I would say it's possible, but not advisable. There are just a lot of issues here. So first of all, I'll mention during pregnancy, the one good thing about plant-based diets is we do tend to have far fewer or far lower intake of environmental contaminants, and so the breast milk tends to be low much lower in environmental contaminants than it is for omnivores. But to feed during pregnancy a fruitarian diet that's just fruit and some nuts and seeds, it's just not very easy to meet your recommended intake for protein, iron, zinc. I worry about intake of B12, vitamin D, iodine. There are a number of nutrients that you would need to be taking supplements if you're eating that way. And so are they taking supplements? And if not, I mean, to be honest, if a pregnant mother has a B12 deficiency, her B12, infant will be born B12 deficient, and they don't, infants tend not to have stores of B12 like adults have. And so adults might last 2 or 3 years without showing obvious signs of B12 deficiency. Some people it's faster. It'll be within 6 months to a year. But for a lot of adults, there are significant stores. There are not for infants. Infants don't have good B12 stores. And so they can develop a deficiency within weeks or months of life. And B12 deficiency in an infant is irreversible brain damage when it's severe. And that's just, to me, it's not worth the risk. It's just not. Vitamin D deficiency means rickets. Iodine deficiency is the #1 cause of cognitive dysfunction in the world. And generally in developed countries, we don't see severe iodine deficiency, but we certainly see suboptimal intakes that can result in an IQ reduction of 10 to 15 points for our kids. That's a lot in terms of its effect on learning. And so there are a lot of reasons why I would say eat a wider variety of foods. If you want to eat a fruit-heavy diet, more of a raw food diet yourself, be sure of those nutrients. Consider at least adding some, sprouted lentils and mung beans and adding some sprouted grains. Just have a little more variety. And then for children, children have very small stomachs, and they on a sort of a low caloric density kind of diet, like a fruitarian diet, they would have to eat a lot often, and to get enough calories. And even then, it's going to be really hard to get enough calories in these little small stomachs. I would definitely use some cooked foods for children. I would make sure legumes are present in the diet. I would make sure that they're getting more concentrated sources of calories, like grains and starchy vegetables. And I'm, just concerned because we have seen, the old 1970s studies that showed failure to thrive in plant-based children. These studies were looking at children that were consuming very restrictive diets. And these kinds of restrictive diets are risky, to say the least, for children. And we do not want to make our children the experiment. It's just not worth it.
Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. Okay, so Vesanto, we can move on to a little bit later years. So perhaps teenagers who are athletes and adults who are athletes. We can start there, and then going into an aging population. That it's also very interesting. I feel like the beginning of life and a little bit later in life, it's that's when the protein needs are probably the most different. I don't know if that's accurate, but that's from my observation, even in terms of clients that I see or just my parents. Like I just noticed certain things, and so I'd love to go a little bit deeper because the people listening to the podcast are very wide range of a lot of mothers, also a lot of people in their 30s and 40s and who have children. So the information we just shared is key, but also an aging population that perhaps doesn't really want to eat as much. They don't really necessarily want to have as many proteins. They don't feel great because they don't digest them. And of course, there's a difference between animal protein and plants. So we can go a little bit deeper into that. So I just gave you a lot of information.
Okay, so I'll talk about adults, and maybe we can move back to Brenda for the athletes part. So what I find for adults, by the way, with this raw situation, when we're using lentils on a raw food diet, you take a 1/4 cup of whole lentils and sprout them, they'll fill a jar. So even when people are eating sprouted lentils, they're not getting that much protein as they would if they cooked it into a little lentil soup. And you don't lose a lot of nutrients by cooking. The ones that you rely on from the legumes, from the beans, peas, lentils, are protein, iron, and zinc, and they're not damaged by cooking. So it's not like the vitamins that can be lost when you heat food. So it's really wise to add some of the legumes, the beans, peas, lentils, to the raw food diet. And then you're getting a wonderful mix. So what we want for adults, the official recommendation, there's two ways of looking at recommended intakes. One is in terms of grams per kilogram of healthy body weight, and the other is as a percentage of calories. So we've got the two ways. So in terms of grams per kilogram healthy body weight, and what this means is if somebody's quite a lot overweight, have a lot of extra fat cells, they don't need the protein based on all those fat cells. So it's per kilogram healthy body weight. And that includes actually a 25% safety margin to deal with the fact that we have somewhat different requirements. And then for plant-based, we add about 10% because we lose a little bit in the digestive process carried out with the fiber. So that's like 0.9 grams of protein per kilogram of healthy body weight for an adult. And that is really not hard to get. It's quite surprising, just when we do these food records, when I have clients and do their food records, it's not protein that ends up being short. And even when people are like 75% raw, it's very easy. Then as we get older, we find that the North American official recommended intakes have not changed for seniors. But in Europe, they're smarter, and they have increased the recommended intakes for seniors in many countries. And so we need at least 1 gram per kilogram, or maybe 1.2, somewhere in that range. And it's because our absorption changes with time. It gets less with time. And so this is one of the places I've been really interested in because I'm 81, I've gone, and I'm really hoping to have a lot of healthy old vegans as good examples all over the world, just show people you can be older and you can be in wonderful health. So protein's one of the places to notice. And of course, when you have that, you're also getting lots of iron and zinc and other nutrients that are required. Now, it can be challenging when people get older because they have this lesser absorption. They may have dental problems. They may have a little challenge in how to prepare food or get food. So it was really interesting to try and figure out how to deal with the challenges. One of the things that I've found, I'll show you a little picture here from our plant protein book. This is Gado, and it's got some tempeh in the middle, little cubes of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I have started, we've got tempeh or tofu, little cubes or fingers. This is in our Plant Powered Protein book, that are marinated. And then I cook them in an air fryer because you don't have to add oil. And you can go and do other stuff, and the air fryer just heats them up and deals with it. You're busy gardening or whatever you want to do. And they're like little marinated cubes, and it would be the way that somebody would eat potato chips if they were eating junk food, but they're little marinated cubes of things. And I find that a really good way to get extra protein for a senior. And so when I get maybe low blood sugar and I need the protein can also help with that, then I'll just grab a few of these little things that are sitting there in the fridge all the time. So some of the practical things that can help are learning like a simple lentil soup recipe, cooking a whole pile of it, and then, a big pot full rather, and then putting it into individual containers in the freezer. And so that you just pull out one at a time and have the seasonings you like with it. So there's some easy ways to do this. I've also even helped some seniors that were in nursing homes that called me for a consultation and talked to their cook, their chef, about some easy things that they could have in the kitchen for the 1 or 2 people there that are plant-based in their diets. And it worked really well. Like, you know, if a chef can get a little bit of a tip, oh, this will work, you know, then it just solves the whole thing.
Brilliant. And, you know, you touched onto something. So obviously protein can help with regulating blood sugar if you're a little bit low in sugar. But then we have a aging population that is, you know, rippled by things like diabetes. And we know that diabetes has a severe effect on the kidneys. We know kidneys are severely affected then by protein. And again, we're talking, for the majority of people, we're talking about animal protein. So I think a lot of the people that I have been speaking to obviously have problems like this, and so they struggle just to not just only digest protein. And obviously we're talking about lower hydrochloric acid, so it gets really complicated. But the fact that they have all these ailments and they just cannot process all this, do you feel that if they moved from animal protein to a plant-based protein source for their meals, they would actually benefit in all these different areas, so they could manage their diabetes better? And I know you guys wrote books about diabetes, and also to support their kidneys so that they don't have issues, you know, because of the diabetes with the kidneys, and that then the protein doesn't affect the kidneys negatively.
Well, maybe Brenda deal with this one, because you've had some real life experience.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. So it's so interesting if you look at the research comparing, plant to animal protein, for example. What we see is that consistently, it's not even just once in a while, consistently, when you replace animal protein with plant protein, even just a small amount, like a lot of the studies use a figure of 3%, replacing 3% of calories from animal protein with plant protein, and look at, the outcomes. And just to put this in context, 3% of calories in a 2,000 calorie diet is 60 calories. That's less than an egg. It's about the amount of 1 ounce of meat. So it's a very small replacement, but even that small of a replacement reduced in a big 2020 study from the US, reduced risk of mortality by 10%. And then there are a number of studies that have actually further quantified the different animal products, and they found replacing 3% of energy from dairy or fish, I think it was an 8% decrease in mortality. When red meat was replaced, it was a 13% for men and I think 15% for women. And when you replace eggs, it was a 24% for men and 21% for women. And this is just this tiny amount. So if you actually do the math, which is quite fun to do, if you replace a large egg, 2 ounces of meat, and 1 cup of milk each day with plant protein sources, you would reduce your risk of death 54%. Wow. And based on, this trial. And then there was a trial of over 70,000 people in Japan that showed if you replace 3% of calories from red meat with plant protein, it would reduce mortality by 34% and by 46% when you replaced processed meat with protein. And we see very similar sort of data with when you're replacing a meat with, in looking at specific diseases like cardiovascular disease and diabetes and cancer. And I can remember one 2021 study that showed if you replace animal protein with plant protein, or I think maybe it was the people eating the most animal protein compared to plant protein, they had a 251 increased risk of heart failure, whereas the lowest quintile of animal protein, people eating the least amount of animal protein, had a 56% reduced risk when they were getting most of their protein from legumes. So it's just, and there was a study in diabetes looking at just replacing 1%. That's like 1% is like 20 calories from animal protein with plant protein, reduced risk of diabetes 18%. And then for cancer, that Japanese study also looked at cancer. And they found replacing 3% of calories from animal protein with plant protein dropped cancer mortality 39% when it was red meat you were replacing, and 50% when it was processed red meat. So, and the studies, there are just a ton of them now. There are a lot of these studies, and it's just very consistent. Plant protein. And the reason is simple. Plant protein is, sources are rich in fiber and phytochemicals and antioxidants and plant sterols and stanols and all of these protective components, but they're low in the components that are more pathogenic or harmful to health. So you think about the saturated fat and cholesterol and the new 5-GC, which is a pro-inflammatory molecule in meat, and all the TMAO precursors and the endotoxins and, all of these things which are higher in animal foods that you're avoiding, and all of the good things that you're increasing your intake of. And we also know that plant protein is more gentle on the kidneys. So you end up with preserving kidney function when you swap animal protein for soy protein, for example. So definitely some huge perks to having, plant protein compared to animal protein.
I love that. And in terms of digestion, you obviously feel it's also easier to digest and break down the amino acids in plants, right?
I wouldn't say that. If we look purely at digestibility, the digestibility of protein from animal products is very high. So it tends to be around probably 93 to 97 or more percent. Because the thing that inhibits the absorption of protein is fiber, because some of the fiber gets carried out into the stool. So in terms of digestibility, pure digestibility, animal protein digestibility is higher than it is for plant protein foods.
But I meant it.
Tofu is up there with the heavy hitters.
It is.
And lower fiber protein, plant protein foods. So if we remove the fiber, the digestibility is very similar, but for whole plant foods, it's a little lower. And it's not like tremendously lower, but it's probably in the range of 15% or so lower.
Yeah, I actually meant it also in the scenario where obviously aging person would have less hydrochloric acid, and without hydrochloric acid, it's really, really hard to break down the protein. So is plant-based protein in that case easier on the body with less hydrochloric acid, or it doesn't really matter?
Well, if you talk easier on the body, there's so many factors.
I know.
Like, having fiber that'll carry things through is really a good thing when it comes to pooping, It's really a big help. And having iron and zinc and all these things that are abundant in the plant foods. So there's so many good features. So we wouldn't want to say there's negative things about the plant protein. It's just that you need a slightly higher amount, and it could be seen as 10%. But if you rely on a lot of things like tofu, I think peanut butter and whole wheat are up there with the well absorbed too. There's several plant foods that are equal to the animal products. But it turns out to be people are getting enough protein, whether they're on plant-based diets or animal product diets. With animal products, they get way, way more than they need. With plant foods, they get more than they need. So
and to the question of hydrochloric acid and enzyme production, I'm not sure that is as dependent on what you're eating. It's certainly it would affect it somewhat, but your production of enzymes declines as you age. Your production of hydrochloric acid declines as you age. And so it'll be somewhat individual, and that of course will impact your ability to extract nutrients and to break down proteins adequately, and that will vary considerably between individuals. I've actually never seen a study looking at comparing people who have eaten plants for years versus those eating animal-centered diets, their production of hydrochloric acid and enzymes. I'm not sure if there's a big difference there. You, Vesanto, have you ever seen
No,
that?
I haven't seen that. And I
No.
haven't seen it in clients either. No.
Okay, brilliant. This question for me came up because a lot of people are taking proton pumps inhibitors, and obviously that will affect their hydrochloric acid later, and they then struggle to digest pretty much anything, not just protein. But of course, as they get older, then it becomes even more of a challenge because, as you just said, they would naturally also produce less of enzymes and hydrochloric acid. So I think perhaps that would be an interesting study to have, right? To see what the difference would be between whole food, plant-based eaters. I don't want to say just vegans because you're going to have a junk food diet and then it's just not going to help you anyway, versus the meat eaters, and just see what happens, to their production of enzymes and hydrochloric acid as they age. Does it prevent the body from declining as fast,
That was such an interesting point about being on protein pump inhibitors, because I'm guessing that people eating a sort of a standard Western diet are going to be taking those things a lot more than people eating a whole food plant-based diet, which would give the whole food plant-based eaters a distinct advantage there in terms,
Yeah, totally. Brilliant. Okay, so now we have covered pregnancy, we covered lactation, we covered infancy and elderly population. Now we have the adults that are athletes that we can go into. And I know, Vesanto, you mentioned that Brenda would cover this. And I know, Brenda, you love your sports. So so maybe, let's talk about the needs for an athlete on the protein. And does it change if depending on the age of the athlete, if they are younger or older?
I would say probably not. It changes according to the intensity of the training and the sports that you're doing. And so generally, I think the first thing that needs to be said is that for active individuals, there really isn't a huge increase in protein needs. I mean, if any, it may be slight. You might want to aim for a gram of protein per kilogram body weight. But it's really the competitive athletes that require increases in protein intakes. And so these are people that are training for, probably at least a couple of hours every day. They're working really hard. And of course, there are different types of athletes, the bodybuilders versus the endurance athletes, and their needs will differ slightly as well. But generally, there is not a separate RDA, at least in North America, for athletes. I'm not sure about other countries, but we do have recommendations by sort of sports bodies and the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics and the American College of Sports Medicine, and they generally recommend 1.2 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram body weight. And I know that sounds like so much if you think of even 1.5 grams per kilogram body weight. For a big, athlete, that ends up being a fair bit of protein. It could be 120 grams of protein a day. But what a lot of people don't recognize is that athletes eat a lot. When you're training that hard, you need a lot of calories. And so let's say you've got an 80 kilogram athlete who needs 120, say, grams of protein a day if they're needing whatever it is, 1.2 grams per kilogram body weight or whatever. If the athlete's consuming 3,500 calories, it would amount to about 14% of calories as protein, which is actually pretty easy to do on a plant-based diet that focuses a little bit on protein, that kind of ensures you've got a source of protein with your meals and snacks. So it's just not as challenging as it is for the seniors Vesanto was talking about, because for seniors, you're looking at a decreased intake in calories and an increased protein need. And so it gets really tricky. and seniors aren't as focused on protein. They like good tea and toast and things like that.
Yeah.
So it can get a lot more challenging, whereas athletes tend to be obsessed with protein. And so they, their intakes are usually pretty good, and they don't actually need to be consuming protein powders. It can be actually helpful for some athletes who are really challenged to take in enough food, or for seniors, but they're not, necessary at all. And the amino acids that some people worry about for athletes are the branched chain amino acids, leucine, isoleucine, and valine. And those amino acids are really important for building and maintaining muscle mass. And they stimulate protein synthesis, and they inhibit muscle loss, they improve recovery. And so people get concerned about getting enough because they're definitely more concentrated in animal products. But just because they're more concentrated doesn't mean they're going to not get enough of them from plant foods. And we've done some analyses, and it's really not that difficult to meet needs if you're including soy foods and legumes. And even one thing that a lot of people think of as not a great source of essential amino acids, say TAN, is actually quite high in branched chain amino acids. It's low in lysine, but it's quite high in branched chain amino acids. And things like veggie meats are very concentrated sources. They're about the same as meat, and about the same amount of protein, but the same protein digestibility, the whole 9 yards. So for people that really want to pack on extra, that is definitely an option. Even grains, a lot of people don't think of grains as being a good source of protein, but they do provide about half the world's protein. And all of these foods can add up. Throwing some hemp seeds, throwing some all of these different things onto your food can really help. So that's those are a few issues. And the other thing that we know, there have been a number of studies, including a meta-analysis that compared plant protein, and specifically in this one meta-analysis from 2018, they compared soy protein to animal protein in terms of the muscle gains, and the muscle gains were pretty much the same as the muscle gains from an animal source of protein like whey. And then there's a brand new study that just came out this year. It was very small, just 22 young adults, but they reported comparable protein synthesis rates and skeletal muscle growth in those consuming animal versus plant protein sources, just so long as they were eating enough. And then there was another study of over 3,000 individuals that were consuming different dietary patterns, and their muscle mass and quadriceps strength were very positively associated with total protein intake. But it didn't matter if that protein came from plants or animals. The gains were about the same. So we've got some pretty good evidence that athletes can get sufficient protein from plants, and that protein will do the same job that animal protein will do in terms of muscle gains and strength and all of that.
Yeah, I don't know if you watched the Game Changers. I mean, it was probably one of the best documentaries to help people, especially men, embrace a plant-based diet, because I feel like a lot of men obviously are afraid of becoming, very skinny and losing all that muscle tone, and if they're training especially. And this really just proved that you can get enough protein on a plant-based diet, even as an athlete. Do you feel that the documentary was accurate, or do you think they exaggerated some points?
I would actually have to go back and look at it again. I think there were some points that definitely could have included more studies and been a little bit more accurate, but generally I think that the point that they were making is very true, that there are incredible plant-based athletes who are both strength athletes and endurance athletes who are plant-based. And some of them, if you look at people like Scott Jurek, who's broken more of the endurance records in the world for doing absolutely insane, you think of running these 100-mile races. I think one time he ran a race where he did the equivalent of something like 5.5 marathons in a day. Just unbelievable. And he's been completely vegan for, many years. And so absolutely. And then in terms of the bodybuilders, I know a lot of endurance athletes who do extraordinarily well, but there are also strength athletes who do extraordinarily well too. And if you go to, veganbodybuilders.com or something, you can find a lot of people that are doing what you're doing if you're trying to build muscle, and it will definitely give you peace of mind that this is not only doable. There's some advantages of choosing to be plant-based. When you're an athlete, you have certainly, I would say, less oxidative stress. You have improved circulation. You have reduced inflammation. You have a healthier gut microbiome. You have richer glycogen stores quite often. Plant-based diets, people tend to be leaner when they're eating plant-based. So there are a lot of advantages for plant-based athletes that I don't think should be ignored. Because, and I have a friend, her name is Sonia Looney, who I remember she went, I think it was 2015 that she went completely vegan, and she is a world-class endurance mountain biker, and she was in the top 20 in the world. And again, it's just insane races that are sometimes 7 days long, this kind of thing. And she was really worried. She said she thought she was making a huge sacrifice, and she was really worried that it would compromise her level of performance. But she became so ethically committed, she just couldn't make another choice. And she said she was shocked at how much her recovery improved. And within 6 months of making the transition, she won the world championships.
Wow.
So, she said it was just the opposite of what she thought it was going to be. She said her performance actually improved, her recovery improved. And so there are a number of athletes who are saying the same. Not that people can't, most athletes are omnivorous. So certainly people can accomplish great things athletically on a well-planned omnivorous diet. But they can also achieve great things on a well-planned plant-based diet, and there may be some advantages.
Yeah.
There are excellent websites about plant-based athletes that people can explore. And we did some raw food books, speaking to some of your high raw audience, with Sherry Soria. And we also taught at a raw chef school for 3 years before COVID. Brenda and I was in California, in Northern California. And so it was very interesting for us to explore the raw world. And when I met Sherry, she'd never turned her stove on, ever. And then she got really interested as she got older in increasing the protein a bit and shifting slightly. And she is now close to 80 and doing ultra marathons. Wow. And in many countries, many parts of the world, and in tremendous health. So it's been interesting. And so she switched from being entirely raw to being high raw and is still doing marvelously. I know a number of the athletes too, Serena Williams, but in many, many sports that say their endurance and their performance has increased tremendously since they went plant-based.
I think by default, if you're doing a whole food plant-based diet, you're automatically also discarding a lot of the processed foods
That's right.
that perhaps you thought were healthy, in brackets. Mm-hmm. And that could just, allow your body not to be as inflamed. Your digestion will be better. Your body's working as it meant to be. Because ultimately, I think going back to nature for our foods is the best thing we can do. Whatever people decide to do with their dietary choices, and of course we promote a whole food plant-based diet, but taking out the junk. And this is probably why you see traction even with crazy diets like the carnivore, because ultimately what they do tell people is get rid of all the junk and just flesh. And people do feel better for a very short time period. I mean, long enough to be worrying, but they feel better because now they removed all the things that just didn't work for them. That were pre-packaged, ultra-processed foods, and unfortunately, they don't think about the consequences of a low-fiber diet that is void of micronutrients that are essential you cannot get from animals. Long-term, the high saturated fats, but they do feel better short term because they've removed all the processed foods. So, I think that's obviously a baseline for us to consider when we are looking at diet to begin with. Because obviously, as I mentioned at the beginning, I wanted to make sure that we talked about the whole food plant-based, because unfortunately, even in the vegan space, I know people that eat just junk food and they're vegan.
Yeah, exactly. And Vesanto and I together wrote a book called Becoming Raw.
Yeah.
And so for people that are eating a raw food diet, this is a very deep dive into the science and really shows you how to put together a raw diet that works.
Yeah.
You don't want to ignore B12. You don't want to ignore iodine because that can get you into trouble. And so just how you do it and make it work for you.
Yeah, I have it here. I love it. It's been really, really helpful. There it is.
Becoming Raw. And it was so interesting doing this. Again, our publisher wanted us to write a raw book. And we said, we don't know about raw. And so he said, who better to do it? So we did. And also we were involved with Sherry Soria. Here's her picture.
There she is.
There she is. And it was fascinating. We just learned so much. And there were some kind of myths among the raw food community that, cooked food was poison kind of thing, that kind of thinking. And we looked at all the research that was quoted and found out what the real science was. And also we learned how wonderful it is to be higher raw. I think both Brenda and I probably went more raw in the process. Like always now, half my lunch and half my dinner plate or more, 2/3, is a huge salad. And then I have some other things to add to that might be like a cooked veg or definitely some beans, peas, lentils, tofu, that kind of thing.
I think that's how I'm feeling comfortable doing it as well. Like I feel more driven towards that. So I mostly have these massive salads, and then I would have like some chickpeas. I'm obsessed with air fried chickpeas that become really crispy. So I use them as croutons. I just find them the best thing ever.
What do you do with them? Do you put anything on them or just
spices? So smoked paprika, a little bit of salt, any other spices that I might have, and then I just put them in the air fryer without oil, and they just become super crispy. And then I just sprinkle them on top of the salads like croutons, and they're just brilliant.
Oh, that's great! I haven't tried that one. I will.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, and Vesanto was saying we both really upped our intake of raw foods, and I still regularly make dehydrated granola, dehydrated crackers. There's a number of these raw cheeses that are just fermented cheeses with nuts and things like that, and we really learned a lot, and we contacted researchers all over the world to try to get to the bottom of some of these myths and to try to figure out what was true and what wasn't true. And so it was a very interesting project, and we learned a lot and began to really appreciate a lot of the wonderful foods that are really completely raw. Really fun.
I mean, the book is fun, and also the history, and you have a chapter where it talks about the history in the United States, and obviously there's a lot of connection to some of the hygienist movement in Europe. And fascinatingly enough, a couple of years ago, I was talking at this event here in Portugal, which is like a vegan fest up in the north. And actually, Dotsie Bausch was here talking with Jean Bauer as well. They were talking at the same place. So one thing that we learned at this conference is that even in Portugal in the 1930s, they had this hygienista movement. Like they actually called them naturalista because they love to be also naked on top of eating fruit, mostly. So they, but it's something that people don't really talk about. But it was something that was really popular, and it was mostly among the more aristocratic families and members of society. So it's interesting because obviously this is taken aside, kind of way on in history in this country, I guess because they went through a lot of, dictatorship that had Salazar up to not long ago, 40 years ago, I want to say. Mm-hmm. So it was really something that you couldn't sustain. You couldn't be a raw foodist or a hygienist at the time, but it's amazing how back in history they had this movement here that was really a privileged movement to be in. And it just really shows that obviously there is something where we can draw a lot of information, a lot of benefits from having more raw food, maybe even through pandemics where in Europe faced and the United States faced in history, people that maybe had a higher raw diet that ate really well and looked after themselves, they were healthier. They managed the diseases better, in comparison to people that perhaps had a diet that was mostly grains, potatoes, and meat. So, we have to be balanced about everything. I feel like a lot of the times we go very extreme. So we have extremes on all sides, and then we get lost in the extremes, and it becomes a little bit of a fight between the opposite, the polarizing sides, and that is kind of what I think with your book you kind of bring it together to center. It's realistic, it's very approachable, it's logic, it's well researched, and it covers, as we mentioned last week when Cory was on, we cover many other issues, not just diet, but also our impact on the environment. So I think it's a very well-informed book that you guys wrote. And I mean, that's with every book that you wrote. They're all very well backed by research. It's amazing.
Thank you very much.
We put our studies on the website, the Plant Powered Protein website, because we had to keep it a skinny little book. But we always have a lot of references. So if people ever look at that website, plantpoweredprotein.com, they'll see the references there. So it's one of the things that helps.
I do want to end with one question about one controversial food, which seems to be always soy, right?
I knew it was going to be soy.
It's always going to be soy. So yes, last time we talked about the agriculture that includes soy and how GMO soy is grown for food that goes to cattle and not to humans and so on. But a lot of people would be like, yeah, I would like to be more vegan, and I am worried about protein, and I could actually do it, but soy, I don't know, the hormones, and then, breast cancer, and they throw everything at you with, this is bad for you. And then of course they don't understand the difference between actually organic soy that is made for humans versus the one that is actually damaging the planet, that is made for animals. So can we just talk about soy? Why is it safe? Why is it actually a great add to our diets if we want to have a good balanced protein intake?
I'll just start and then pass it over quickly to Brenda. But we thought, 15 years ago that soy was questionable. There's these isoflavones in it. They're kind of like estrogen. Don't they cause problems? Don't they lead us to breast cancer? And the whole thing has turned around now. We find they're actually protective against breast cancer. When kids have soy when they're little, that protects them against breast cancer in later life. And when people have had breast cancer, it reduces the recurrence. And we're finding that with prostate cancer too, for men, soy reducing the recurrence. And a lot of it was based on a couple of studies of men, 2 men, one was about 20 and one was about 60, that ate a pile of soy. Like one of them ate 12 servings a day and one ate 20, about 20 a lot of days. And so their whole diet, I don't know if he lived near a factory and got it for free or what was going on. But anyway, at the end of a year, they had some health problems, man boobs. But you shouldn't eat 12 or 20 servings of any single one food. It's just crazy to do that for a year. So they went to their doctors, and their doctors said, don't do that anymore. And they changed back, and they got all back to normal again. But that research has been used by Weston Price and the meat industry and so on to show that soy was bad, without saying that it was only these two people who did a very unbalanced diet. So that was really fun. So Brenda?
Yeah, so and what I would add is Vesanto mentioned breast cancer, that it, especially if you're consuming soy during childhood or adolescence, it seems to reduce your lifetime risk. But also there are some studies that show it may reduce risk of recurrence of breast cancer, and it may improve survival for those who have breast cancer. So these, estrogens in soy are really plant estrogens, and they kind of look like estradiol or human estrogen. They attach to the estrogen receptor sites, but they're what we call selective estrogen receptor modulators. And some of them act as weak estrogens, and some of them act as anti-estrogens because they attach to receptor site and don't let the human estrogen on. So it can actually reduce the impact of that more, cancer-causing human estrogen. So, and I think that's why it tends to be protective in breast tissue. But there are also some pretty good studies showing it can reduce risk of prostate cancer in men. It tends to be somewhat protective against cardiovascular disease, hypertension, kidney disease. There's a little bit of evidence regarding bone loss, that it may protect against bone loss. It definitely reduces symptoms of menopause for those that are, consuming it regularly. So there are a number of protective things. And for all of those sort of naysayers, the people that say, soy is dangerous, to me, the acid test is to look at the healthiest, longest lived people on the planet. And if you look at the people in the blue zones, there is actually 2 out of the 5 blue zones where soy is a staple. It's consumed every day, pretty much. And those are, the Seventh-day Adventists of Loma Linda and the Okinawans. And in the Okinawan diet, they average 2 servings of soy a day. And they are among, the traditional Okinawan diet eaters are among the healthiest, longest lived people in the world. So if soy was really poison, it probably wouldn't be a staple in the diet of the healthiest people on the planet. I think that we need to recognize that soy isn't absolutely a necessary addition to a plant-based diet, but it can be a very healthy addition. And it is a source of very high quality digestible protein, especially if it comes from tofu or soy milk. A little bit less digestible in whole soybeans, edamame, tempeh, because there's more fiber there, but it's still super high quality, wonderful source of protein. But soy foods are also extremely versatile. Tofu can be made into a meat replacement, a dairy replacement, a replacement for dairy in desserts or main dishes. It's just so versatile. It adds a lot of joy to a plant-based diet for me, and I think for a lot of other people as well. So it upsets me when people say it's such a dangerous food and you shouldn't be consuming it, because it's a really wonderful addition to a plant-based diet for so many people, and a nutritious one at that. And I would say, you want to be choosing mostly less processed organic soy foods like edamame, tofu, tempeh. Even have a little miso, natto if you can tolerate it. And a lot of people don't like the taste because it's fermented. And of course, soy milk, if you compare the different non-dairy milks, soy milk is by far the most nutritious. It's the highest in protein, but it's also the highest in other trace nutrients. If it's, of course, fortified, we would advise it to be fortified with calcium and B12 and vitamin D. But it really is the most nutrient dense of all of the non-dairy milk. So it's a really good choice.
You actually ended with the milk, and I think maybe it's worth mentioning there are unfortunately people that are allergic to soy, and if we're talking about infants, a lot of the alternative to dairy formulas are made with soy. What would the parents be able to choose if obviously dairy wouldn't be an option because they are plant-based, and then soy wouldn't be an option because the baby is allergic to soy?
Well,
Yeah,
many
so
places there are new milks coming out, and I think this market is expanding. Nestle, some of the big companies are moving into it. You know that we're dairy based, and they're increasing with hemp. So in different countries, it shows up differently, but it's worth keeping your eye on the SKUs of milks. Brenda?
yeah, so I'll just add to that in fact in Europe, the only two vegan formulas that are completely 100% vegan on the planet that I'm aware of are both from Europe, and one is BBM and the other is Sprout, I believe. And they're 100%. They're both right. Neither one is soy based. One is rice based, and one is rice and pea based. And so these formulas are, I think a very, very reasonable option for those children. And then for young children that are allergic to soy, certainly there are a lot of pea milks. The other thing you can do if you want to just have cashew milk or almond milk is you buy the fortified milk. But then you can add protein by blending it with hemp seeds, which adds protein, iron, zinc, all of those nutrients. And, you can just take a 2-liter container and blend about a cup or so of hemp seeds into the milk and make it much more nutrient dense. So that even 3/4 of a cup of hemp seeds. But so there are definitely some options out there. But it's just good to know in North America, we do have an organic soy formula that's close to vegan, but we have regulations about the type of vitamin D that has to be used. And right now it's all vitamin D from lanolin, so they don't call that 100% vegan, although the soy formulas are very close. And there are several non-organic soy formulas as well that can be used. And in North America, people can try to order BBM or Sprout from Europe, but it's very expensive and it's not always available. So then they end up with one of these amino acid formulas if they can't tolerate soy and don't want and can't tolerate dairy or don't want to use dairy.
I see. Thank you for that. Okay, I think we need to end with this question about obviously. First of all, do you use Chronometer or other apps to calculate your nutritional intake daily, and especially protein in this case? Or do you know how to eat and giving an idea of what is a day in your life like when it comes to food, and how do you more or less think about the amount of protein you're putting into your meal? You both have to go for this.
Yeah, you can start, Vesanto.
Okay. Well, I use a program, and I have clients all over the world, Europe, all sorts of places. I use a program called The Food Processor with Esha. And I've used it for about 20, 30 years, but it keeps improving. So it gives very, very detailed analysis for every nutrient, and including protein, and also can show people exactly where it came from. And I find some of the ones online don't have quite as complete, well, nearly as complete data, and it's not updated all the time and that kind of thing. So that's really helpful. And I always get inspired by Brenda because she keeps herself really lean, and I'm always testing different recipes and stuff. And so I wanted to reduce my weight a little bit lately, and I worked out a program on my Esha that was just like avoiding all the junk foods. I mean, I don't eat the junk foods a lot, but I could put what would something? Oh yeah, if I saw a vegan chocolate brownie somewhere, then I would have it, or have it in my freezer so I could have one once in a while, that kind of thing. So anyway, I decided to go back to the more whole foods, plant-based completely, and just be really careful. but also to make sure I got enough protein. And so my breakfast right now is a smoothie that has kale in it. We have gardens, and I go and collect some, and oranges or orange juice, part of a banana, and hemp seeds, quite a bit of hemp seeds for the protein. Well, just about quarter cup. And then for lunch, I'll always have this great big salad on my plate, and then add some tofu or beans, or I've got a bean salad that I really like, that I keep in the fridge. This is from our plant powered protein, but I find this a very helpful thing to have. I'm kind of like to keep life really simple. So I have things in the fridge that I'll eat time and time again. So I've got a leafy salad and a lemon tahini dressing that I love. And I notice whenever I've got my plate there, that's what I start on. I love it so much. And then I've got some beans to go with that. And so lunch and supper are pretty similar. And then at night, Cam and I have grapefruit and banana, kind of little fruit salad as our evening snack. So it is definitely whole foodsy. And to limit the calories, I cut back more on the grain type things. So we found we can meet our protein intakes if we focus on the vegetables, some legumes added, some fruits and vegetables, and some nuts and seeds, well, seeds particularly for the omega-3s. So that's my day.
Awesome.
And I actually don't monitor my intake in terms of using Chronometer or any of, ASHA or any of that on a daily basis. I've looked at my intake time and time again, just on occasion. My intake is usually really good, but my breakfast is I would say call a breakfast bowl, and it generally contains grains, whole intact grains like kamut berries, barley, something like that. Sometimes oat groats, quinoa, and I always throw in a little bit of lentils. And so that just adds a little bit of protein, and that's sort of the base of my bowl. And then I'll have in that bowl probably 1.5 cups to 2 cups of fruit, usually berries. This morning I had a mango and a bunch of berries. So it'll be some different combination of fruit depending on the season. And then I always have in it some sort of something creamy. And so it could be a plant-based plain yogurt, unsweetened yogurt, or it could be a chia pudding that I often have in the fridge that, again, doesn't have any added sugar at all. I actually steam a pear to put in the chia pudding to give sweetness. And then I have it with soy milk. I have it with a little dehydrated granola and a little bit of an omega-3 seed mix on top. So it's a very filling bowl, and it tides me over to lunch very, very well. And then my lunch is always, I have a really big bowl of salad that stays in the fridge until it's gone. It lasts me 2 or 3 days when I'm, alone, and I'll have a big bunch of greens and veggies from the salad. But I always put on, like lately it's been a homemade hummus, baked tofu cubes, and cooked lentils. So that's what's been going on. And actually I often sprouted lentils. I'll put some sprouted lentils. And then seeds. I put seeds, either pumpkin seeds or sunflower seeds or something like that. And I have this exact same dressing as Vesanto. I love the tahini lemon, which I infuse some hemp seeds into that dressing as well. And then my dinner is different every day, but quite often it is a protein. It might be quinoa with beans, and then 2 or 3 vegetables and a little bit of salad. Not as big of a salad as at lunch, my meal is a salad. So at dinner, it's a little smaller. And I don't really eat between meals. I do have a treat after meals quite often. Usually at lunch, it's just an orange. At dinner, it might be, a stuffed date or something like that. But I tend to have something small. And that's kind of my day. And I don't eat anything after supper. So I have that fast from about 6 p.m. to about 8 a.m. in the morning, so about 14-hour fast. And my weight is, able to stay very stable at that, with that kind of, and then I do at least an hour of physical activity a day as well, which helps too. But yeah, and I love my food. I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, fantastic. And you're making me hungry. It's almost time to eat. So thank you for the inspiration. Ladies, I am so glad you made it on the show. I just want to say congratulations again for your book. It's beautiful, it's helpful, and all the links will be in the show notes. And yeah, I'm very happy that we connected, and I couldn't be more grateful that you made the time for me. Thank you so, so much.
Thanks so much for having us, Chantal. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Chantal.
Thank you. See you soon. Bye.
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 Thank you so much, Brenda and Vesanto, for being on the show. Such an honor to have you here. And guys, I hope you love the show as much as I have today. Such a beautiful array of information that really is helpful and really can help us educate others around this topic of protein, which by now I thought would be just over with, but there will always be people that will question where our nutritional intake of protein comes from because of the brainwashing that we've been put through forever. So I really hope this is helpful. And if you haven't gotten yourself a copy of the Plant Powered Protein, please make sure that you go into the show notes and you get yourself a copy. It's a wonderful book to have handy. The science is great. The environmental part that we talked about last week is great. So it's a brilliant, brilliant book. Of course, if you like this episode, make sure you share it, you rate it, you help us grow. And I'll see you next week. Bye.